Yes, remotely at least. Yeah. So I've already introduced you. This is MEP Garcia de Blanco from the Parliament, and he's written the opinion for the Jury Committee on the Data Act. So we'd love to hear what you could tell us about that and where it's going.
Okay, thank you very much, and apologies because I wasn't able to manage to be there because of the demonstration. So I'm trying. I try to be as clear as I pretended to be in person. It is a pleasure to be here to share with all of you the work that I carry out in the European Parliament on digital matters, and concretely on the Data Act, because I was involved in more files. At least 50 countries, including the European Union, are addressing the question of how to define ethics in the digital environment. In one hand, safeguarding fundamental rights, among other aspects, respecting the private space of people or their personal data, and on the other hand, enhancing innovation and fueling the data economy and technological developments. The European Union wants to regain its leadership in the digital transition, and for this, it has been developing and renewing its strategies, and it has been committed to regulate, proposing pioneering rules to harness the digital decade. Europe is looking to its European Union regulatory leadership, known as the Brussels effect, to set the basis for the rest of the world. I mean DSA, DMA, and AI Act mainly. To promote the development of the European single data market, we have continued to work on strategies and regulations. Europe has a huge potential with industrial data. Its development will support innovation and the development of new digital products and services. All this, we want to do it in European way, respecting principles based on trust and accountability. Last year, we passed the Data Governance Act, which regulates the altruistic exchange of data and the provision of access to public data that is not protected by intellectual property rights, and it is duly anonymized. The figure of the data mediator is created to facilitate the flow of data between those who want to see them for specific uses, including research, and those who need them. Governance rules ensure a level playing field in the data economy, in which common European data spaces facilitate the sharing and pooling of relevant data in trusted and fair conditions in strategic fields of action: health, tourism. The Data Governance Act is complemented by the recent Data Act, which I'm responsible for the Legal Affairs Committee, as you said, in particular on what regards the protection of trade secrets and key aspect of the regulation that we are currently negotiating in trilogues. The Data Act aims to regulate and promote the sharing of data between users and businesses, and under exceptional circumstances with the public sector, in a context where the volume of data created by connected products, think about the Internet of Things, or online services is increasing exponentially. The Data Act determines and clarifies who can generate value from the data obtained and under what conditions. In 2023, Sciences Business is in the European Parliament, we have clarified the types of data that fall within the scope of the regulation, providing data exchanges with guarantees and greater legal certainty, protecting the rights of consumers and businesses. The European Parliament wants to facilitate exchange with public administrations in emergencies and to improve public services. Safeguarding, this is quite important, personal data. Introducing new rules to facilitate switching between cloud service providers and other data processing services is called interoperability. Establishing safeguards against illegal international transfer of data by cloud service providers, protecting the data leakage to third countries. That is a question that is so important in the matter of security. As mentioned, URI has exclusive powers over the protection of trade secrets. The European Parliament proposal is a balanced strategy through technical and legal measures that aim at reinforcing confidentiality. Trade secrets must serve to protect investment and innovation in Europe, while maintaining the right of users to freely dispose of data and its transfer to third parties. With this balance, we will provide with greater security to all data exchanges in the single European data market, favoring the development of a technological sector that can lead the digital transformation of our societies. We need a strong governance to make the data market works. Likewise, we call for a data coordinator in each member state with powers to decide in case of conflict of interest in data exchanges, B2C, B2B, B2G, facilitating the harmonized implementation of the law. Furthermore, the European Data Innovation Board, created in the Data Governance Law, acquires new powers to improve coordination between member states and maintain open channels of dialogue with interested third parties. Finally, it has also been, thanks to Yuri's proposal, that data literacy is included as a fundamental requirement, so that users and businesses know their rights and their obligations, of course, in this European data market that we want to build. I'm convinced that, to develop a digital landscape where Europe can excel, it shall be done in an inclusive, transparent, trustworthy, and democratic way. We need guiding principles, we need strong governance and enforcement mechanism, and we need to provide citizens with the trust, knowledge, skills, and tools to guide this digital transformation. The future of our own democracies at our stake. And I have to stop here because we are now in ongoing negotiations at the trilogue, so I can show up more details, but I would be absolutely keen to exchange with you in more occasions. Thank you very much, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak online. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us virtually. Do we have MEP Bonifay on the line then as well? So we'll just wait for him.
Yes, I'm here. Hi.
Digital technology at work.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine. Yeah, thank you very much. I've already introduced you, and we'd love to have you tell us what you can about the AI Act.
Yeah.
And what's next?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for this opportunity. Unfortunately, I cannot be with you in person, but I hope I can give you a few useful insights on our work. I'm also sorry that I cannot stay very much, but I hope I can anyway give a useful contribution. We are concluding the Parliament work on AI Act. We are going to vote the final act in the middle of June. We already voted in committee level, and then by the end of June, we will start the negotiations with the Council. So we will enter the trilogue phase. The AI Act is the first regulation of its kind at a global level, horizontal hard legislation on AI. I came back just a few days ago from Japan, where I had many meetings, including with the Minister for Digitalization. And I will be soon again in US with meeting legislators there. That's because we have valued from the beginning as Parliament the regulatory dialogue at the global level. We want our effort to regulate AI to spark a global discussion. For example, on the idea of having a risk-based approach, so a risk classification of AI use cases, we found interesting support and interest from other parts of the world. So the idea is to work so that we can regulate AI when it's needed, not overburden AI with regulation when not needed, but identify when there is a high risk, or even prohibit AI users when we think the use is to be prohibited because of an excessive risk. This is the case in the Parliament proposal for biometric identification in public spaces in real time, emotion recognition for some users, predictive policing, and other uses that we will prohibit. For the high risk categories that we identify, we have foreseen, as the Commission draft proposal has foreseen, a conformity assessment. So we will ask the developers to go through an assessment of data quality, of technical requirements, of the possibility of a human oversight, etc. We will have for sure complicated discussions with the Council on some points, some of the prohibitions that I already mentioned, but also on the idea that we have brought forward of a fundamental rights impact assessment by the deployers. So not the developers, but the intermediate users between the developer and the final affected user. In fact, I think this is a good balance because in general, the AI Act brings back to the developer many of the responsibilities that otherwise would be on the shoulders of those that actually use the AI system. While we think that the developer has in many cases the real possibility to confront with biases and with issues that could create risks that needs to be mitigated or eliminated. So the AI Act, for sure, it's a important digital file. It is, we can say, in the trail of Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act, the Data Acts. That, I mean, there are more than one act on data that will be and has been or will be under possible approval soon. So we have seen that we have brought forward, and I conclude on this, a big effort to build a real digital single market, overcome fragmentation. I hope that this effort will be successful, and I think it will be crucial that we conclude the negotiations on AI Act by the end of this year, or most lately by beginning of next year, so that we can, by this mandate, conclude this file and have it in place. This will be very important. Otherwise, there will be new elections and it could take much more time. But I don't think we have a lot of time. I didn't mention it, and I say this as a last element. We also introduced in the text of the Parliament indications, new rules for foundation models and generative AI, so the ChatGPT and such. We introduced very strong transparency requirements on the material used to train the AI, and also on the fact that the content produced by the AI needs to be recognized as non-human made. I think we did it well to work also on this, because the original text of the Commission didn't consider at all this kind of foundation models and their applications like the generative AI we know about. So this will be a matter of a very new discussion also with the Council, because when the Council concluded its position in December, simply this debate was still not there. And the Council had admitted, at least some people admitted to me, that they will need to discuss it now, because they didn't do it when they closed their position in December, because the Council closed its text already in December. Thank you. I hope I gave you a few ideas to reflect on, and let's see you soon. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Wow. No time for questions, I think. Well, at least you covered
Maybe
a lot
one.
of ground in the...
Maybe one.
Oh, you're still
Maybe
there.
one.
Would
Maybe
you
one.
be able to take any questions virtually?
One.
One questions. Excellent. So one thing I'd like to ask is that you've talked a lot about trust and making the internet safer, the AI, but will this actually produce any innovation? Because ultimately the digital agenda is also about producing innovation in Europe. Will this actually lead to any, or is it just throwing sand in the gears?
Well, I hope it will produce innovation. Otherwise, it means that innovation can only be developed in a high risk context where consumers cannot be protected. I don't believe that. So I'm convinced that we can deliver innovation even with these rules that simply try to preserve our social model and preserve our democracies. So trust is crucial when you are in a democratic context. Otherwise, people will just refuse technology, or they will be scared by ex post damages, while we want to prevent that as much as possible. Obviously, the balance is difficult. You need to avoid overburdening developers and the ecosystem. I think we try to strike a good balance, and I hope we will have a successful negotiation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we will move on then straight on to Christer, I think. Christer is a cybersecurity expert at the European Commission and has been working on that for a very long time. I think we first discussed it over dinner almost 10 years ago. So I'd love to hear what you're working on, what's happening in the cybersecurity space, and whether you can ever get ahead of the curve of the hackers.
Thank you very much, Brandon. Thank you very much for having me. Well, I've worked for now close to 7 years in the cybersecurity department, of DG Connect in the European Commission. And I go way back into, let's say, previous units and directorates in DG Connect and the former DG Info in the Commission, working on satellite and mobile communications, internet, and international relations. I'm coming close to retirement, but still, let's say, with cybersecurity, I think you'll never get off the subject, because it will still be there for many years to come. I joined at the time, actually at the very moment the NIS directive, the first cybersecurity regulation in Europe, came into effect in July 2016. And it was then implemented by the member states by November 2018. And following the review of this NIS directive, which covers 7 critical infrastructure sectors, which are basically the energy, transport, health, banking systems, digital platforms, etc., digital service providers. It was then considered we need to review it. We hadn't actually got all of the things we wanted in the first proposal, which came out in 2013. Member states were a bit reticent to include some of the sectors we proposed. Anyway, so we reviewed it on the basis of 2 years of, let's say, implementation, and came up with the NIS 2 directive, which has quite a few more elements in it compared to the first version. First of all, we have added plenty more critical sectors. We've included public administration at a certain level. We've included space sector. We've included water supply, etc., etc. You know all of this because it's been published in January this year. It's still to be implemented 21 months later, so in October 2024. But at the same time as we've, let's say, reviewed it and tried to upgrade with security of supply chain and vulnerability disclosure databases and penalties for the top management in organizations affected by the directive, in the end, similar to the GDPR, where there is penalty, of course, if you lose the personal data. We have also come to realize that we are living in a data economy where plenty of IoT devices, Internet of Things devices, are connected to the internet. The internet, of course, being a great boon and a great facilitator for communications and being offered free of charge, basically as an innovation. We've seen all sectors of the economy, of course, using the internet more and more. We've heard from the Secretary of State, from Belgium, how this has, let's say, led to plenty of other, let's say, concerns, who is responsible for what, and where to draw the lines between developers and users and final, let's say, let's say, final users of AI and blockchain, etc. But we've also realized that ransomware is becoming more and more a critical issue. Cybercrime is costing the economy worldwide. I think globally, something like 5% of world GDP, which is an enormous amount of money. There's a ransomware attack happening every 11 seconds somewhere in the globe, affecting, of course, innocent websites or innocent users and owners of digital, let's say, systems. So we need to do something about it. And finally, we've come forward with the Cyber Resilience Act, which is tackling anything that has, let's say, a software embedded or a software used in the product. When the internet started, of course, nobody thought about security. That was not the primary concern. So then came, let's say, before then the PCs, and then the internet and the emails and all the digital solutions. And we've, let's say, realized that cybersecurity needs to be built in from the start. We now have the concept security by design. We have the Digital Europe program on an R&D side, focusing on AI, focusing on cybersecurity, and a few other, cloud computing, and a few other, let's say, big tickets, where I think AI is the biggest part. Cybersecurity is the second biggest part. We also have the European Cybersecurity Coordination Center, inaugurated just last week in Romania, in Bucharest. And that center will, let's say, coordinate with national coordination centers across Europe the funding of the Digital Europe program part on cybersecurity. But going back to ransomware, we have something like 45 billion devices connected to the internet. And as we are living in a data economy where these devices on the edge of the internet are processing the data, they need to be put secure. To retrofit these, let's say, devices would be costly. So we're now looking into what sort of standards we can apply, cybersecurity standards, we can apply to any future IoT devices, and those devices listed in the annex, which is quite long, before they enter the market. So hopefully in the future, we will have cybersecure devices connecting to the internet. But this will take time. Right now, we're in the middle of actually doing a mapping of the cybersecurity standards which are available. If they're not available, they could be developed and then be applied to these IoT devices, as I call them generally, before they are entering the market and be sold or distributed on the European Union market. In parallel with the NIS to NIS2, let's say, directive, which has now been published, and with the Cyber Resilience Act now being between the European Parliament and the Council to be debated, which is ongoing work right now. We, of course, also started negotiating with NATO. A lot of EU member states are also NATO allies. We've seen Finland join recently. We hope to see Sweden. I'm from Sweden myself, and I, let's say, would welcome a Swedish membership into NATO as well, because it would strengthen the Northern Hemisphere tremendously, although we have cooperation already, of course, with NATO. But as a full member, we would, let's say, go the full step. So in 2016, also with the Warsaw Declaration, we set up cooperation between EU institutions, which is Council, Parliament, EEAS, and the Commission, and NATO on the other side, to work on cybersecurity or cyber defense. They call it cyber defense, we call it cybersecurity. But basically, it's making sure we have access to the critical infrastructure sectors. The military depend on them as much as the civilian sectors. So we have that ongoing and continuous cooperation with them on cybersecurity, but not only on that, but also on classified information and sharing the information we have intelligence-wise with each other, and quite a few other, let's say, areas, hybrid threats, etc. So that has grown in importance and is now, let's say, working very nicely. We also have seen what NATO has done, view the, let's say, Ukraine war in February last year, and how our infrastructure has been weaponized. We've seen the attacks on the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines, which was an attack on the gas pipelines, fair. But at the same time, there was an electrical cable running across these pipelines from Sweden to Poland. and the explosions happened very close to the electrical pipeline. So we're wondering whether that was intentional or not. We've also seen spy ships out in the Baltic Sea and into the North Sea, mapping out where the communication cables, the subsea communication cables, linking up through internet cables, the different continents and also between member states and so forth, where they are and where the wind farm parks are. Wind farm parks. And we're concerned that if the spy ships are doing that, they have some intention in the future to use that information to our, let's say, disadvantage. So what the Nord Stream 1 and 2 sabotage in September last year did was it called upon us, the services, mainly DG Energy, which is in charge of energy policies, and DG Connect, where I am, to look at how to look for the vulnerabilities of these subsea cables, be it gas pipelines, be it electricity cables or communication cables. And we're currently doing that right now. And we'll come back in September by the latest with some recommendations and possibly also some legislation, still to be seen how far we go on how to protect these subsea cables. Most of them are, of course, in international waters, which is outside our jurisdiction, but they are, of course, coming on to land, connecting with terrestrial networks, and that's where we can strengthen the security issues and a bit into the, let's say, seas at the time. I'll stop there, but I think there will be questions and many things more to say about it.
Covered a lot of ground.
Thank you.
So do all please start thinking of questions, and then when Jeremy is done with his introduction, then we'll open it up to questions. So Microsoft is a not insignificant company in the digital space. You've heard about the Data Act, the AI Act, a bit about cybersecurity. We haven't talked at all about chips, and I think Mr. Michel talked briefly about blockchain, but what are the things that are going to have the most impact on businesses, such as Microsoft? And do you look at that as an opportunity, or as I sort of said before, sand in the gears?
Well, my role in the office here in Brussels is managing our broader policy team. Right? So we're looking at these policies, the ones that you mentioned. Sustainability is another one that has a lot of leadership from the EU side of things. But cyber, AI, and cloud, I think that's a good space to look at, because some of the technologies that were mentioned even earlier by the minister, they're all powered by those same things, right? So I mean, there's cybersecurity elements to all of this. So there is, I think, what we're starting to refer to this year, at least, it's an inflection point in artificial intelligence, where for the first time, this has been talked about for decades, and I think it's been talked about even at a policy level for several years now, particularly in this commission. We've known that this is going to be one of those next shifts significantly, across the board. And I think this year is when it's gotten real, where people are using these technologies day in and day out. And we're already looking at regulation therein. And when you start to use them, you start to, as Brando was saying earlier, when ChatGPT or something comes out and when you're already regulating that space, how would these rules facilitate that, mitigate the risks, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a natural conversation to have, but you could tack on cybersecurity to that, and you could tack on the Data Act in particular. I think if there's one message I would leave folks with, is that they're all interconnected. And so if you give the best AI Act proposal possible, but the worst Data Act proposal, they both fail ultimately. And I do think there is a need for not just guardrails in this space, but clarity from the regulatory front about what's allowed and what's not allowed. It's a very fast-moving, competitive space. There's risks that some players certainly take to get advantages. So the sooner we can have norms and clarity in the regulatory field, I think that would benefit everyone. But clarity does come with, what you can digest. And there have been a tremendous amount of proposals coming out of this commission. Just in the lunch break, we were talking about cybersecurity, and we were talking about, compliance obligations in terms of delivering software updates. And you can imagine where the cybersecurity officials would lean in that space. And it's understandable. It's pretty straightforward, arguably. But there are privacy concerns there. There are sustainability initiatives that are moving forward in that space that overlap somewhat. There are consumer protection policies that implicate that space. So when we know that some of the worst results of cyber attacks happen on machines which haven't been updated, well, do you take away the possibility for a customer to decide upon those updates or not, to force them to protect the ecosystem? Well, to do that, you would also have to track certain behaviors that would implicate privacy prohibitions potentially. So it's not that straightforward. I think it's really hard for us to tell our engineers what they have to do. You know, before the ink is dry on one proposal, there is often another proposal that's coming forward. And especially when you're getting pulled in different directions from different directorates within one, legislator. But the political intentions are fairly clear. And I think the strategy from this commission has been arguably quite well put together. It's when it gets into execution mode that you do start to see some of these nuances and potential challenges. If you think about the deliberative approach they've taken on the AI Act, which I think is appropriate, this risk-based approach, as we've talked about, and the distinction between different parts of the ecosystem, you have to make sure the obligations match there. And I think they've looked at that rather deliberatively. I mean, it's taken some time, but that's understandable. As Brendo said, it is the first horizontal binding set of rules in the globe. But at the same time, you don't have AI without cloud. And if you're limiting European enterprise, public sector, consumer access to some of the cheapest and state-of-the-art technologies for different reasons, that's going to diminish your ability to achieve some of those AI objectives. And then you also get into the practicalities of some of this. When you think about things like foreseeing the risk, if you're developing a generative AI system, he mentioned the difference between deployers and developers. Thinking hypothetically of every single use that could come from the toolkit you're making available, that's an impossible obligation. Once customers get a hold of this and start testing it out, they come up with all kinds of different ways to do things, some of which might not be good. But to foresee all of that at the foundational layer, that's going to be just impractical. But then where do you put the obligation? You should put it closer to where the risk occurs. And I think some of that balance is coming through in the negotiations. The Data Act is a little bit more interesting because there's several proposals in one there. There is this business to government proposal in the event of emergencies. How do governments get data from the private sector? That implicates certain business models, that crosses borders, that's something that's relatively novel, and it gets a certain set of stakeholders very interested. And then you have this data opportunity that we all seem to agree on. And I think there is a lot of potential in data reuse, and some of the reservations that people would have had before about sharing data. Technology has gone a long way towards addressing some of those. But you can understand that privacy concerns, trade secret concerns, loss of competition, these are all relatively, understandable reluctance that companies would have to share more data. But the truth is, to be successful at AI, you're going to need a lot of data. And it's very unlikely that any one entity on their own has enough data to be successful at AI. So you're going to have to collaborate. You're going to have to reuse. You're going to have to share data. But there are different points on that spectrum. There's one thing to just say we open up everything for everybody to use however they want. Well, that's not very realistic. I don't think anybody's calling for that. But then you do want to incentivize this somehow. You want to provide more clarity. And I think a lot of our customers who in manufacturing context, health context, they do have some concerns about loss of trade secrets in this space in the name of data sharing. Well, how do you get that balance right? The legislators have said, we want to protect trade secrets, but incentivize data sharing. It's not that straightforward, and I think looking at incentives there would be better. And then some of the rules around cloud, I think to all of these technologies, whether it's some of the ones that were mentioned earlier, the ones we're talking about now, cybersecurity comes up in that context as well. Having access to those technologies and making sure you have as much choice as possible, I think should be the goal here. There's differentiation in that market that spurs a lot of that innovation, and I think we want to maintain that. I think most of our customers are customers of multiple cloud environments. Right? They're not just Microsoft customers. Over 95% are multi-cloud customers. And increasingly, there's market demand for those clouds speaking to each other to facilitate, some of these exchanges. There can be one offering that's really good at providing one service for one customer, but there's other offerings that can provide different sets of those needs. And I think just keeping the choice open as much as possible is going to be the best way forward there. I just think that in this mandate, the opportunity has been recognized. I think there's just been so many policies that it is often hard to keep track of it. So to get back to your question, I always say that if in Europe, startups and SMEs versus their global competitors, if they have to hire lawyers rather than engineers, that's not always a recipe for competitiveness compared to your counterparts. But at the same time, you need guardrails on some of these things, absolutely. And I think you can be clear in that with enough dialogue in place. And I think Europe really does have an opportunity. There is a significant amount of talent in Europe for this space. There's a huge market. There's an awareness of its importance. And I do think there are security concerns that come up in that context. This AI race has an element of that. You know, there are definitely, you know, geopolitical considerations that I think should come into play there. But I think there's a lot more alignment between Europe and certain jurisdictions on that, where you could see more of that alignment landing in a norms development space as well. And then that becomes a bit of a global standard. And then I think we're all competing to the same level. So we stay optimistic about it. It certainly is a lot of policy to digest in the past few years.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions already? There's been a lot to take in, but if anybody does have any questions, I gladly let the floor ask the first. If not, then I would have a question for Christer maybe to start. So you talked about these undersea cables, and I had asked the question which you didn't directly answer at the beginning, which is it actually possible to ever get ahead of the curve? I mean, if you say there's a ransomware attack every 11 seconds, and the Russians and anybody else can basically just go into international waters and look at these cables.
Right. Well, my personal, let's say, view is, and I think I can have that in a few months' time when I retire. But already my personal view is, and the short answer is no, we can't get ahead of the curve. What we can try to do is to mitigate as much as possible and to prevent as much as possible, given the legal powers we have. But it's not only process and technology, but it's also people that are involved. We need to have a cyber hygiene, let's say, installed into every single mind of every single person, using from a smartphone to a PC to any, let's say, IT system. That cybersecurity is important, and that passwords should be longer and more tricky to, let's say, remember and to spell out. Somebody told me that among students in Brussels, the famous password is pizza, because everyone eats a pizza. And that's probably their favorite food, and available, probably cheap, etc. But anyway, it's easy to remember. But it's short, and it's too, let's say, easy to hack into. Somebody told me it had to be 12, 15 alphanumerical characters long. Then at least a normal hacker would have to spend 2 weeks before it could hack into your password. Continuous, let's say, computing power. Of course, if you have government agencies where their computing powers, they would crack it in probably minutes, but at least the normal hacker would have slightly longer before it cracks your password. But you need to change that password every now and then. With the IoT devices that you buy and use and then just put online, there may not be a, let's say, password to enter, or it's a factory standard password, which runs forever. So there are, let's say, ways to stop that from being the case. But it's, let's say, it will probably take a generation of young people growing up with the internet, growing up with smartphones in their hands already at, let's say, a very young age, to come to terms and realize that, yes, cyber hygiene and cybersecurity and privacy issues is something important. If you go, let's say, on a holiday and immediately post your photographs and saying, I'm now in Greece enjoying a nice bath in the, let's say, in a hotel, or let's say at the spa, or whatever, then of course somebody can figure out that you're not at home and you would be burgled. Instead, post these photographs when you come home. What's the difference? I mean, it will be posted, but at least you're home now and you can post what you did last week. I mean, things like that, small things that would probably change a little bit your safe and secure environment. But I don't think legislation will actually tackle the problem, because cybercrime and cyber hackers are more innovative and faster to come up with ideas. Mr. Olson from Microsoft just mentioned the fact that should we take away the right of users to upgrade and bring it back to the owner of the software to do that on their behalf. I don't think that's the answer. At the same time, a company like Microsoft needs to publish when they have an update, a software update, a 0-day vulnerability, whatever they figured is there and it needs to be done. Back in 2017, I believe, in May, there was a cyber attack called WannaCry. It started out and ran rampant across the world. Agencies like NHS in the UK went down, their service went down, Telefonica's network went down, Deutsche Bahn's network went down in Germany, etc., etc. Some 150,000 computers were affected. Deutsche Bahn's, let's say, explanation was that we were intending to upgrade this anyway in October, but this happened in May, so a few months before. Tough if you have it planned and the upgrade needs to be done and you haven't done it, well, you're vulnerable, and they paid the price for it. We've seen NotPetya a few months later or a year later, where Maersk, the big container ship company in Denmark, had its logistics destroyed and interrupted, and it cost them $200 million something. So while we can actually try and address it legally and put some onus on the operators, the owners of the data, which is being processed on behalf of persons or companies, whatever, and put some penalty on that just to make sure that they upgrade their cybersecurity systems, we cannot actually, let's say, rule out all the cyber hacking taking place. It's just a matter, well, somebody said, it's not a matter if you're going to be hacked, it's a matter when you're going to be hacked, and if you actually know it already. Maybe you have been hacked and you haven't been noticing it yet. So while, let's say, this goes on, and we try to, let's say, strengthen the legal framework and make sure that the operators of, let's say, critical infrastructure and owners of personal data, etc., as entities strengthen their, let's say, systems, we cannot actually rule out cybercrime. But we can certainly make it tougher for the cyber hackers to get to the critical infrastructure and switch it off. Let's say my wife, as soon as she gets onto the computer, she plugs it in, and then as soon as she's read her email, she plugs out, well, she disconnects. So that computer is only on for a few minutes. It's not continuously on. And a lot of our systems are just kept on because it's easy and convenient for whatever reasons, but it's not actually very smart if you have, let's say, not all the cybersecurity, let's say, systems hooked up.
So on that cheery note,
Yeah.
the secret of connection may be actually disconnecting from time to time.